So to start off this part of our project, let's kind of recap what we did last week. So last week we finished out by creating two actions for our login. We had one that handles the HTTP GET, and that basically just returns our view, and then the second one is our HTTP POST action that handles our post back. So in here we have two parameters. We have a username and a password parameter, and then we just simply output hello to the username and say welcome to our application. So what we want to start out by doing is utilizing what's called model binding in our application, and that involves us creating a class that would replace these two input parameters, and that class would model what the input parameters are, or what kind of data we're expecting back from our form. Now this model serves two purposes. One is for that input factor so that we don't have to keep adding additional parameters to our actions. The second thing it does is it actually serves as a view model. So as we begin building more complex views, we can use that model class as the template or blueprint for how our views should be constructed. And then we can actually handle those models both on the view side as well as the post back. And you'll see how those two relate a little later. So to start off, we'll go into our models folder. And personally, I always like to create a folder for my view models and call it view models. And the reason for this is we'll have additional like data models later and different kinds of models. So having view models versus data models versus maybe business object models, it always just makes it easy to have them kind of separated out. And then I'll also go ahead and create another folder in here, and I'll call it account. And that way we know that the view models in here correspond to our account controller. So I'm going to go ahead then and right click on the account folder and say class. And this will be my login user model. Actually, this will be my login user view model. Now this is just a basic straightforward class, or a POCO, plain old CLR object. And what we're going to do here is we're just going to put in a few properties. These properties are going to match our input parameters off of our login action. So we'll do public string username, and this will be a get set shorthand, and public string password. This will be an additional get set. Now, if you're not familiar with the shorthand property designations, what this basically does is instead of creating a private, where you normally do private string underscore username, and then we'd fill out these gets and sets, by doing the shorthand get and set, we don't have to bother with creating a private variable. The compiler actually creates this private for us, and then we just access everything through the property directly. So this comes in actually pretty handy in terms of code management and how much work you have to do. If needed, you can always expand these properties into the more complex types where they have a private and a public member. But for just straightforward objects that just need a public property with a get and set, this works perfectly every time. All right, so we now have this login user view model as our model class that we can use on our account controller login action. So to do it, it's actually pretty straightforward. We just go in here and take these two parameters out, and we replace it with login user view model. And we'll just call this our login user. Now we're getting a red underline here because we have not imported the correct using statements at the top for this class. So in Visual Studio, you can click on it. We'll get this little action menu. We can drop down on it here. Oh, let me do that again. Drop down on it here, and we'll add this using statement for using WSAD underscore app1, which is the name of my app. And then you'll see our folder structure relates to our view or our namespaces. So WSAD app1 is the app name, models.viewmodels.account. So we'll click that, and that'll add another using statement up here to the top of our page. And then our class name turns this light blue color. So now we have everything wrapped up inside of this one class login user. So if we come down here to our return content, username no longer exists. It's now part of our login user object. So what we'll do here is we'll say hello login user dot username. And it is case sensitive, so you have to uppercase the U. Now, when we do our postback, what ASP.NET will do is it will take the username and password input parameters, and it will actually look through the login user view model and try to find the properties that match those names. And then it'll actually create an instance of the login user view model object, and then it'll take those values from those postbacks and put them into the appropriate property. So this is very helpful for allowing us to then continue to expand our view models in our postback data without having to continue to add additional parameters. We just expand that view model object or view model class, and we add those properties to it. So we'll go ahead and save this, and we'll go ahead and run. And the net result here is that even though we made this change within our code, the application itself will still run and function the same way as it did before. All right, so here's our application as before. So we'll come up to our address bar and we'll go /account/login. And we'll be able to log in just as we did last week. And we'll get back the same result. Now we'll jump back to our code real fast. And we'll put a breakpoint here. And we'll simply submit this form again. And we'll see here in the break that we now are at our return content, which outputs that string of text. But if we look at login user, we actually have an instance of our login user view model object inside. And if we expand on this, we'll see that our password property has our password and our username property has our username. So the values out of our text box, username and password, now are being bound into our model class. And by doing that binding, it provides us a much better organization for our application, and then we can utilize that class or that object, in this case login user, and grab our username out of there. Now that becomes very helpful when we want to add additional properties to our view. So let's say that we wanted to add something like a checkbox that says remember me. Well, now we can simply add a Boolean property called remember me to our model class, our view model class, and that will then get consumed and populated with the postback just as these two did. And we'll cover that more in the next video.